Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Academy, announcing the 24th of our Italian Wine Ambassador courses to be held in London, Austria, and Hong Kong from the 27th to the 29th of July. Are you up for the challenge of this demanding course? Do you want to be the next Italian Wine Ambassador? Learn more and apply now at vinitalyinternational.com.
Hello, everybody. My name is Polly Hammond, and you are listening to Uncorked, the Italian wine podcast series about all things marketing and communication. Join me each week for candid conversations with experts from within and beyond the wine world as we explore what it takes to build a profitable business in today's constantly shifting environment. In this episode, we are joined by Sean Spratt, owner and winemaker at Destiny Bay, New Zealand's only luxury wine brand. Today, we talk about the 20-plus year family journey that went from maybe making some wine in the garage to recently becoming the only New Zealand wine to be listed on the Place de Bordeaux. We touch upon everything from building a quiet brand to balancing exclusivity to the impact of climate change. Let's get into it. Sean Spratt, you get to fill one of my New Zealand blocks. I get so few opportunities to interview New Zealanders, and I've used this as a chance to get you on the podcast. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure. I'm, as an expat Kiwi, I'm glad I still fill that criteria. So.
I know. I do think that's funny. We've got two Kiwis in the room and nary an accent between us.
No, that is right.
No. And so you are the owner and winemaker of Destiny Bay. And I was thinking about how to describe that because I've known you for so long that sometimes I forget Destiny Bay is New Zealand's only super premium wine brand. Is that true? Is there anyone else who falls into that category?
There are a lot of people now that are starting to move into that space. Certainly when we started this out, 20 years ago, we were like, there was nobody even really close to what we were sort of doing in terms of aspiration for the market that we were trying to go into as a, true sort of luxury wine brand. Now we've got some people that are coming up close to it, and a lot of people have sort of, I'd like to think that maybe we, helped, maybe break a few ceilings along with that, but I think it's also probably, a lot of it's, the industry at large too. I do, as far as I know, we are still in the pole position in terms of price leading, and as a Cabernet blend specialist, certainly with some of the recent reviews and critic scores and winery of the year, we do seem to have the street cred to back that up a little bit.
Right. And I do want to talk about that, some of those reviews, but just for everyone listening, can you tell us a little bit about Destiny Bay? I know that, I know that the world doesn't know New Zealand as well as you and I do.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't, this wasn't a project where we came here. It's a family venture. So it's my mother and father, Ann and Mike, and I started this. The first vines went in the ground in 2000, but we didn't come here with this express purpose or goal of starting, a vineyard, let alone a Cabernet blend specialist vineyard on an island called Waiheke, and in the sort of lower part of the South Pacific. Like so many other expats that live in this country, and I'm sure you're in the same box. My parents came to visit New Zealand and fell in love with it from very different careers than the wine industry. Mike, my father, was a psychologist, but a merger and acquisition specialist, and did a lot of marketing and brand development stuff and along the way with that. And my mother was a microbiologist and chemist and science, but had worked sort of professionally in the technology sector. And it was on that trip where I visited with them that they'd done their first trip, I should say, and fell in love with it. By the time they came back, they were so depressed to go back to America that they started planning their next trip a year later. And I knew immediately when they had come back that they were going to move here, even though they say they did not know. But that trip a year later then turned into a let's expatriate and go, find a place to live in New Zealand. And I tagged along for the ride just as a sanity check, I think, to make sure that they weren't doing something completely crazy. And hey, a free plane ticket's a free plane ticket. So, and it was on that trip at the end of it that we stumbled across Waiheke Island at the end. And then as the course of sort of another year went along, they went to look for, a place that they want some property and, with the hope to build sort of the dream home. And they found a section, and then there was this beautiful bowl-shaped amphitheater with some land for sale and cattle grazing on it. And my mother sort of said those fateful words as they were looking at the one property and said, well, we could buy this one and it's got a nice view and we'll build a house on it. And geez, all that land over there is, looks sort of interesting and pretty affordable. Land's always a good investment.
That's not something you'll hear about Waiheke anymore. Those words. That land there is pretty and looks affordable.
Yeah. Well, it was. And at that time it was, and you certainly wouldn't be buying the land at the prices now to plant grapes on it, unless you just had more money than you could possibly imagine. And then she sort of said those fateful words and said, oh, well, that looks like there's some good wines on the island. Maybe we could put a couple of vines in the backyard and make some wine in the garage. And, lo and behold, 20 years later, we're in a very different position. And that was largely driven by the fact that when we started to look at it from a viticultural perspective, and we looked back to the wines that inspired us and in California, namely Ridge, we had a very close friend of the family who was involved with Mondavi and the Mondavi family and their ventures in Chile when they had gotten into there years ago. And then talked with some, viticulturists and came back and found out that this wasn't just a good place to grow grapes, but a fantastic place to grow grapes, and Cabernet in particular. And so that's when we sort of saw we had this opportunity to do something, not just to make a wine, but perhaps to make something that was really, really special. And that was really what was appealing, is not to just start another vineyard and winery, but to, really sort of shoot for the stars and have the potential to do it. And so in that sense, we sort of felt like the vineyard kind of picked us more than we picked it, as cliche as that might sound. But it wasn't this sort of, set out, let's go to New Zealand, let's find a perfect place to grow Cabernet and whatnot. It was, the evolution of it was much more organic than that.
It wasn't the tech bros who made their money and were like, hey, we're moving north, we're buying the lifestyle property kind of thing. One of the things that I love about the story, though, having met your family, is that your mom, you became a winemaker, you studied at UC Davis. I'm not dismissing the importance of you and your dad, but your mom, who was a scientist, actually was the viticulturalist. Is that right? She did a UC Davis degree and was formative.
Yeah. So what we did is we did the distance learning through UC Davis's extension program. That's sort of where we started. And then when we were here and a couple of years into it, sort of the early phase, I think it was probably 2007, 2008. I was sort of interested in perhaps, and I had a little more bandwidth back then because we hadn't fully ramped up. And so I had actually started talking with Auckland University's wine science program at the time, and I was considering enrolling there as an MFA, or not MFA, sorry, master's program. And I looked at it and I kind of wasn't really that interested in the degree. I was kind of interested in going in and trying to audit courses and kind of pick up a few things along the way. They cottoned on to that.
Learn for the sake of learning.
Yeah, they cottoned on to that pretty quick and weren't too keen on that because they make all their money on graduates and people who publish. And I said, all right, well, look, I'm not going to do that. And my mother said, well, geez, actually, that sounds kind of fun. And so at, getting close to, what she must have been on 60 years old, I guess, at that point, enrolled as a master's student at Auckland University, and then proceeded to go through there for another 3 years and get her master's in wine science. And we did a few research projects, and those were published in some industry journal articles. And so she's where I got my my sort of science, rooting in science. When I was, in grade school, she would make me watch, PBS science programs like Cosmos with Carl Sagan back in the day. And then she wouldn't let me go to sleep at night unless I passed her quiz of all the science stuff. So I was this kid who was like in third grade, begging my mother to go to sleep at the end of night because I didn't want to talk about Copernican theory or Galileo's, law, theories as well. So yeah.
And yet, a dinner with you talking about the vineyard is full of science talk nowadays. I mean, I know you have some tech investments that are very interesting that maybe we can get to in the winery, but you have absolutely embraced that in your winemaking. Would you consider yourself, I mean, do we use the language of precision winemaking? We use precision in other kinds of work. Do we ever talk about that in wine?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing to talk about, I think, in wine, because wine is this, organic process, and it's like trying to control. You can't control everything, right? It's trying to capture lightning and put it in a bottle. It just can't be done. So yeah, we are very precision oriented in terms of what we do. But I think the way that the philosophy that's sort of evolved with this, and this sort of started back when I was talking with Eric Bacher, the senior winemaker at Ridge, about what he does, and the people at Opus One, and a whole handful of wineries that I went kind of touring around and trying to cage different winemakers and pin them down and start asking them questions. And the one thing that kind of came up was that a lot of I didn't ask the question of, we're starting a vineyard and winery. What should we do? I started asking the question of, I'm starting a vineyard or winery. What shouldn't I do? And aside from the obligatory joke about, well, don't start a winery, you get very, very specific questions about winemaking and things like that. People always remember the things that went wrong as opposed to all the little victories. And that really shaped our sort of ethos and philosophy, which is that, as we know, all great wines are made in the vineyard, not in the winery. And a lot of good winemaking is making sure that you don't make bad wine. And so what we've really focused on is how do we take all of those things and eliminate them and sort of because we've got this great vineyard site where we're getting great expression from the vines, from the terroir. And we really want to preserve that and capture that in the bottle. And so the idea is to kind of ring fence that, make sure we guard band and protect all the other things that can get in the way from that and cause problems. And that's where you do get very precise and very technical. Like, how are you sorting? What are we doing in terms of field management? When do you do your fruit thinning or green harvesting? And, what do you do when you're inside the winery? So hopefully what we can do is kind of get out of the way. So if you do all that sort of stuff up front, then hopefully the wines are going to, the grapes are going to do what they want to do and speak for themselves. And you aren't going to have to intervene much actually as a winemaker. So that's sort of where, we kind of call ourselves interventionist, non-intervention winemakers. We don't want to, we don't want to get into it, stuck in the middle of it when there's a problem later. We want to get out in front of it and then stand back and let it coast all the way to the bottle.
Right. Very interesting. I do want to come back to that. I want to ask some questions about the brand though, because in some sense, I feel like you and I have grown gray together. I've known you for so long. And one of the things about Destiny Bay is you're what I would call either a quiet luxury, or nowadays we've started using the word a coded luxury brand. So what that means is there's so many examples in fashion. We've got brands who they're like the secret handshake. You don't know unless you know that is a very fabulous brand. They're brands who don't invest in marketing very much. They're brands who sort of allow their reputation to grow organically. Would you say that that's a fair assessment for Destiny Bay?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think you're sort of talking about, like Gaia or something like that, right? Where,
Gaia is a really good example.
Where obviously they would be sort of the dream pinnacle example. But that, of course, took, a little bit of luck and a lot of timing and to get to where they were too. Yeah, I do think that I haven't actually heard the term coded luxury, but I understand what you're saying. There's always this push and pull for us because one of the things that we didn't want to do that was, that's always an internal debate and struggle with us is, we live in one of the top tourist destinations for New Zealand. And so everyone does tend to come through. So, but we don't really leverage off of that. We're not running, we made the conscious decision to not start a restaurant or a cafe and try to just sort of cast a net into the tourism river and just see, what piles up off the tour bus and all that kind of stuff.
And was some of that because you just didn't want to? I mean, was that just we're not these kind of people, this doesn't interest us?
Yeah, I mean, it was twofold. One is we did look at some other vineyards and wineries where we thought they were doing good work, but were struggling. And I think one of the things that we saw, and this is typical of any business, and this is a big part where Mike's focus comes in, is that there was a lack of focus. They were doing too many varieties, too many different things. They had to spend a bunch of capital up front, but then they started the restaurant to kind of keep going things until the wines kind of got going. And then by the time the wines eventually happened, there was all this focus and pressure on all these other things and sort of these noise and distractions. And so, Mike's, one of the things that Mike always impressed, my father always impressed on me early on was, you either want to be sort of a low cost commodity producer, or the best in your class, or a niche producer. And look, you can do lots of stuff in the middle, but it's very difficult, because if you're in that middle part of the market, you better be very, very good at what you do and have a lot of resources, because you're going to get chomped at from the top and chomped at from the bottom. So if you're going to own the bottom, or you're going to own the top, while those can be challenging positions in their own right, you also have a little bit less competition. You're sort of separating yourself from the herd.
Yeah, and your competition is worthy competition. So I guess going back to this idea of, all right, you decided early on, and I mean, massive high five for what you were saying. And I wish I could just sort of bottle that and get my clients to hear that, of whatever it is, that middle space is so difficult. And we've seen that in the past 2 years, where every brand has said, oh my God, we have to figure out a new way to message and communicate as a result of lockdown and COVIDs. You made a conscious decision early on to position yourself at the very top of the market. Are you willing to talk a little bit, just like you asked your winemakers, about what are the pros? That's great. But what were some of the things that you never expected that kind of bit you in the ass building the business?
Ooh, with this sort of coded luxury thing, just to sort of touch a little bit on that, again, is that, it's always a constant, debate and struggle, because at the end of the day, we weren't fabulously wealthy coming into this. We had enough capital to start it and kind of, put down enough track and runway to get going, but it wasn't, it's not like there's limitless cash reserves for us. We're a small family business. And there is always that, debate of like, well, should we have done more? Should we have been a little more traditional, or run a cafe or restaurant? Would that have helped leverage these things in revenue? So we still talk about this today, right? So this is an ongoing discussion. There's those challenges in every business. I think the cons are, they're probably actually not that unusual things to hear, which is that it's taken much longer than we expected. We've actually managed to kind of get the wines off the ground and get the quality of the wines good right off the bat. Our first, we had a trial vintage in 2004, but in 2005 is really our first commercial release. And, those were really well received by the critics, from the get-go. So we were fortunate in that respect. But I think the things that I probably did not expect to be so difficult is securing talented team and salespeople within New Zealand, I think in particular, that could get the idea and the concept of what we were trying to do, and not fall back into the traditional things of, well, all right, let's find let's find a wine agent or a distributor who's going to pick us up and run their margin, and we've got to go out, run around, market all the wines, and not fall down to the the pitfall of, okay, well, it's not selling as quickly or as fastly as we want. So, all right, let's discount, let's drop the price, let's, do all that kind of stuff. So, we always knew those things were a problem, but I'd say that they were certainly harder than I think we had anticipated. The other thing that we did that in retrospect was, I think, a mistake in many ways, is we knew the U.S. market and we had inroads in the U.S. market. So we really teed ourselves up and focused on being an export winemaker in New Zealand. We didn't think New Zealand would pay the prices that we were sort of looking at the time, or that there would be a big enough market to support us. And so we really tried to focus on the US. And I think the way that we went about that was completely wrong. I would, if I could go back and look at the money that we sort of invested early on in trying to break into the US market, I wish I could have all that money and all that wine back and do it a different way.
Wow, that's interesting. I'd love to explore that more, but I actually just want to mention something that has to do with finding talent and you talking about the challenges of New Zealand. To clarify for anyone listening, in New Zealand, we have a tall poppy syndrome. We're a pretty egalitarian society. So that notion that we have, all those years ago, someone who's running with a high ticket item, super luxury, or super premium luxury, we're not going to have that many people who are comfortable even voicing that message on behalf, because that's just out of the box for us.
Yeah. We copped a lot of flack on Waiheke when we came in and said what we were going to do. And that kind of became, that got into the local water supply. There were only a handful of people that were supportive of us. Most of us were, I think, hoping for us to fail in some way.
It
Certainly
didn't help that you were American.
Yes. And that was also absolutely a big part of it. But there were others that were very supportive, right from the get-go. Steve White from Stony Ridge. I met Steve pretty quickly, but Steve was 100% supportive of the idea. He was not somebody, he is one of those guys that got it right away, which was that, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I was always very appreciative of that.
And 20 years ago, they were the top of the heap. Yeah,
that's right.
That was my first very expensive bottle of New Zealand wine all those years ago. I remember that.
Yeah, that's right. And at this point, it would be Stony Ridge and Destiny Bay are still sort of, sitting in terms of probably at the top of the heap in terms of, reputation and recognition, I think, on, Waiheke for Cabernet blends and we sit in that sort of both in that space of, very, sort of unique small production, vintners.
Kind of owning your space too. I mean, that's a really big thing, is it really owning what you do and not being pushed out of that, as you say, by retailers, distributors, marketers, communicators, all of those of us who want to jump in and say, have you tried something different? So being very grounded in that. So for the brand, like if you go to the Destiny Bay site, it says right off the bat, we're not open to the public. We sell to collectors. How do you, to ask a difficult question, how do you balance you being a very warm, welcoming, inclusive human being with sort of the exclusive nature of how you sell your wine, which is ideally you're going to be referred in, send us an email, we'll add you to the waiting list. There's not enough to go around.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit of a challenge for me. I'm probably, my father and I are, I think we operate as a good yin and yang and sort of check on each other, because I might drift too far off the path without him, and he might push things to a standpoint that we get become too off-putting or too too hard to get
the
to.
two of you bring balance to the force.
We try to, but there's always lots of spirited debate around these topics, and so it is a challenging thing. We want people to find us, but we also don't want to look like we're just the other place that you can get into. And that's part of it is the cost structure. Now that we've sort of had time and honed into it, look, stealing the ideas from Bordeaux with En Primeur and stuff like that, I think was and also with sort of subscription wine models out of the US, looking at the likes of Screaming Eagles or Schaefer or something like that, where you're trying to you're trying to keep your production relatively limited and service a direct customer base. That's something we didn't we looked at initially, but it took us a while to kind of figure out how to hone that and take that in the right direction. And it's been much more successful than and it's been successful in markets in ways that I think we didn't expect. It's been very successful here in New Zealand. That was, and that's sort of going back to my point about saying that that we incorrectly assessed the New Zealand market, I think, and we kind of brushed it off for a little while and didn't think people were going to collect and buy our wines in the way that they do. And we have a very robust and loyal patron club, which is our sort of version of the Emperor program, that are loyal members buying significant purchases for personal consumption each and every year over year over year.
Wow. So I guess I would not have anticipated that either, that New Zealand is a stronghold for consumer behavior for the brand.
Yeah. And our prices are certainly by New Zealand standards are pretty far up there in the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more attractive in in a patron club thing, because you're not paying that fully loaded retail price as if you were getting it, at picking it up at, say, a duty free, on the way out of New Zealand at the airport, when that was a thing.
So we started talking about markets. All right. So you talked about the American market. You talked about the New Zealand market. Who are your strong markets? Do you, and let's go there now. The reason that I wanted to talk to you is you are on the Place now.
That is right. That is, I think we're the first one from New Zealand. I don't, maybe Felton Road, maybe, I don't know, but not to my knowledge.
I don't think Felton Road's on it.
Okay.
No, I don't think they've done that.
Yeah, that's something we've been in discussion with for several months. We got, and I'll be honest, I'm not actually quite sure how this evolved, because we've got Tom Morton, who's been our, sort of sales, director, and he's part of the team and is, sort of a consultant, consulting member of the team. So I can't recall exactly how this emerged. It was something that Tom sort of surfaced, and it was it's a organization over in Australia that's affiliated with Andrew Kayard. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Master of Wine, and so we did some virtual tastings with Andrew. He was, quite thrilled and quite excited with the wines. And, we weren't looking at just new release. We were looking at stuff, far back as the 2010 Destiny. So we are with them. They're called International First Growths, and they've got a handful of wineries, and we're with them, and they are out actively right now, meeting with negotiants in Europe, and moving the ball forward with that. It's been a little bit of a stutter start, only because of everybody getting COVID and Omicron waves and stuff like that. But that is a pretty exciting thing. So we're reserving distribution of Magna Premia now, aside from through our patron club. With Laplace, we may look at some of the other blends, but that's a pretty interesting and exciting new development.
You're so calm about it, whereas I'm so excited for you. And I'm also so excited because this is a great thing for New Zealand. To have our tiny little winemaking country have you guys on the Place is fabulous. So along with that, China, still a big market for you? Sort of what's happened there?
Yeah, China's, after we had been here for a couple of years, and my former sales director, who I first hired, and when I was talking about talent, he was the first one to kind of get on board, Brett Taylor. Brett was from Zimbabwe, and he had worked in fine wine here, and that's how I kind of came across him. He joined the team, and we were looking at the U.S. market was we didn't. The thing that we kind of missed about the U.S. market, particularly in California and particularly in the Bay Area, and this is, I think, the thing that we really missed the mark on, was how fiercely Napa loyal the Bay Area wine collectors are, by and large. And so if they're going to spend money on a top wine, they want to buy Napa. They want to support Napa, right? And we see the same. And now that I've kind of realized this, I see the same thing everywhere. You go to Martinborough, and if you're in Wellington, everybody's buying Martin. You go to Queenstown, everyone's drinking, Pinot and trying to buy Pinot, and they're not selling that much Cabernet blends. They sell some and do stuff, but I mean, the lion's share of it is this sort of local support, either from the tourists who want to drink from the region or from the locals who want to keep money within their own sort of local thing.
Or
and
it's
pride.
what we're used to. I mean, some of it is also just comfort.
I think there's a lot of comfort. I think there's a lot of pride too. In these regions like Queenstown, which is, and Central, which has built a tremendous reputation for Pinot Noir. So there's, I think actually it's a fierce sense of local pride. So we focus in the San Francisco market, and I realize now that was a real mistake. When we probably would have been far better suited to actually look at like Los Angeles or some of these other markets that are actually
where they're removed from
that don't have
wine
that
growing, right? A staunch wine growing region.
So to answer your question, once we sort of looked at that and kind of realized we had misunderstood some of these key drivers or behaviors of the active wine consumer portion of a given market. There's you got the casual stuff, you got the people who are in it, and are buying a lot and day over day, week over week. And then we started looking into kind of what was happening in China at the time. And I want to say this is probably 2010. And we felt that everybody was making the same mistake that we had with these other markets, except with China. And the thing that we're hearing by and large, and I was talking with other, fairly significant producers, some who I won't name names, but people would consider to be competitors of ours, so to speak, and asking them, what do they think about, are they going to engage in China? And everybody said, it's the market's not mature enough. They're too new to the wine world. It's not, we're going to wait and hold off on that. And this is not to pat myself on the back. The one thing that I had become acutely aware of in the late 90s and early 2000s before I came here, because I was actually working in technology and living in the San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley. So I was watching things move at sort of light speed there. Is that I was very much of the opinion that China was going to mature as a wine market, and any of these new sort of emergent wine markets were probably going to the consumer base was going to mature much faster than anybody had ever thought before because of the internet, because of things. I mean, this is even pre-social media, and now you throw social media onto it, which is, for better or worse, is a huge catalyst for a lot of things, and democratizes access and marketing in a way that simply didn't exist before. And so you find people are getting access to tasting notes and events and engagement in a way that they didn't before. And I think the Chinese market moved very quickly. And so we were lucky to we said, no, look, we're going to divert some product over there and take a look at this and think that this might be an opportunity. We saw that they were starting to look at Bordeaux and buying wines up there, but looking further afield. And that allowed us to get a foothold in that market for the tiny size that we are, and recognition as a brand far greater than wineries that are 10 to 20 times our size. And I know for a fact that these other wineries were exporting little to nothing over there when we were shipping wine. And so that really gave us a jump start over it. So we had people starting to show up at the winery coming in from China with old tattered brochures that looked like they had been passed down through 3 generations of people, sort of showing up at our doorstep saying, you're the most famous, your most famous wine, one of the most famous wine brands or red wine brands we know in China. You have this, great reputation in China. And, how do we get your wines? And so we just, continued to support and expand that. And so, we've certainly done a substantial amount of business into China, these last, this last 10 years.
Did you have any concerns about your wine being counterfeited? Was this ever a thing that you had to worry about?
We always keep an eye on it. I am kind of almost in a way gleefully waiting for the moment to start seeing evidence of us being counterfeited, because that's kind of a sign that you have really reached a point here where you've arrived, right? Like you're now worthy of being counterfeited. We sort of circumvent around that. We had a lot of discussion. We talked about, oh gosh, do we need to start employing, serialization, tracking systems? I've been looking at that technology.
Bottle authorization,
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff. It's largely an issue that you worry about more in Asian markets than you do in, say, you certainly is not a huge issue in the U.S. It's present in Europe and the U.S., but not, I think, to the degree that you see it in some Asian countries. What we, in our discussions with our clients in China in particular, is what is most important is not necessarily a a barcode or an authorization system. It is the authenticity and the provenance of the wine and how it got to the customer. And that's what they tend to focus on, is they want to know, how did it actually get there? They aren't even all that consumed or concerned with the counterfeit issue if they know they're getting it from a reliable source. It's when you go to buy it from an unknown source that you run a risk of, what's the provenance of it? What's the, the chain of custody? Has it been handled properly? And this is where Destiny Bay, again, sort of being kind of unique, I think, still in New Zealand, where we do not, we manage everything from the vine to the bottle to the customer's door. The whole way. We are fully vertically integrated in that. So, I mean, somebody could, without even doing a bottle authentication system, somebody could come in and tell me that they bought a wine from so-and-so or somewhere, and I could probably trace it back just about to the very vine and block that it came from, the whole way. So we're able to kind of confront that. And I think that's the thing that means a lot to people. And that's also very consistent with the wine industry historically, right? Like, I mean, we always talk about fine wine when you talk about, the provenance and the authenticity of the wine. So that's how we, I think, address that now.
So I skipped over your accolades. New Zealand's favorite MW, Rebecca Gibb, wrote quite a lovely article about you this year. You were Bob Campbell's Winery of the Year for 2021. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yep. Do you rely on those kind of accolades to build the brand? Like, has that been part of your growth strategy? Is that you are going to be, I don't want to say awards or ratings focused, but that you are going to say, by producing a great wine, we're going to put it into the hands of the experts and let them do the messaging for us?
I think we've always viewed, if you live, I think the concern we have, and this may be true or may not, but if you live by the critic and live by the Gold Star Award, you may also die by it. So I see those things. We always view those things as, they are helpful. They are, but they don't. I don't really believe that critic scores and reviews carry the weight that they do or have the impact on the market that they did 20 or particularly 30 years ago.
Not even for a wine at your level?
I don't think so. I think it's just a box that needs to be ticked. I think when when people are looking for those things, they want to know, especially if you're spending a lot of money on a wine, if you're going to buy DRC, if you're going to buy, anything that's, hundreds of, if not thousands of dollars per bottle. Not everybody who consumes is a wine expert or wine critic, and they want to feel okay and say, well, I think this, and they may not have the opportunity to try it. I mean, you can't just go in and have a taste of DRC before you buy. It's not a try before you buy situation, right? So you've got to rely on somebody that you've got some confidence in to say, okay, well, I want to buy that, but I don't think you're buying DRC because it got X score on it, unless you're playing the wine investment. Wine is is an investment vehicle, which is a totally different thing, right? Like, that's a completely different thing that we're talking about if we're trying to make money on wine by buying and reselling it, right?
Is Destiny Bay an investment wine? Absolutely, it is.
I would hope so. I would hope so. And it's a little hard to say because we don't have a super robust, secondary market at the moment, at least abroad. And then with New Zealand, as you say, it's too small of a market to have a really meaningful one. The problem we have is we don't see much happen in the secondary market. We see a little bit of stuff pop up on Cellar Tracker and some wine movement around the place a little bit. But frankly, most of the people are consuming, most of our customers are just consuming the wine. or it's staying in their cellars. So, I guess that's a story yet to be told.
That's not a bad thing, though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
It's not a bad thing that they're hanging on.
this is a personal thing, and Mike, my father, probably disagree with me violently on this one. But I mean, my inspiration for making wine, what gets me up and gets me into the winery, is not to make a wine that somebody is going to buy and resell later to make a buck off of. It's great if they do it, but that doesn't impassion me. That doesn't make me want to work harder to make the wine. I want to make the wines great because I want to make the wines great. So the people, when they have taken the time, gotten hold of the wines, taken the care to cellar them, that they have, an experience with the wine itself that's meaningful to them. They love
the wine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's what's meaningful to me. So yeah, the secondary market is an interesting thing to sort of think about. But back to the critic scores and to what you were saying, which is that, they are very helpful, but we, I think we've done one competition. I think we did we submitted to a decanter competition years ago, and we'll really never do something like that again, because they're very competitions are the wines that win are good, but so many are left by the wayside because of just the nature and structure of how competitions are run. There's so many wines, so many critics, so many tastings, palate fatigue, palate crossover. There's all these kind of factors that kind of make winning a competition. It doesn't mean that the people who win the competitions are not good wines. They are. They're very, very good. But there is definitely a randomness that occurs there. Whereas working with critics like Rebecca Gibb, Bob Campbell, Joe Szynski, any of the, these people are tasting not in, okay, I've got a 2-day competition and I got to get through 300 wines in the next, 48 hours. They're getting through a massive amount of wines, but they've got a support team. They have people helping them. They've got a schedule. Okay, I'm going to taste this number of wines this day, this number of wines this day. They're tasting day in and day out. So they're spending and interacting with the wines, I think, in a much more different and personal way than what happens under the time constrained pressure of an awards competition, where it's got to happen and it's got to happen at this time. So people who can engage with the story, and engage the wines in a personal way, those are the ones we want to work with, and they help, I think, give support and confidence. We do see some sales upticks and stuff like that, but it's not like, unless you get 99 out of 100, 100 out of 100, or something that is really, really remarkable, you aren't going to have a run on the winery and all of a sudden sell out a vintage overnight. And there were stories of that. I don't know if they were urban legend or not, but I believe that they were true. In the early days of, say, when Parker was at the height of the wine game, and Parker gave something, I mean, Parker would give a wine a 95, and the wineries back in the day would have, a huge surge in demand. Now you get a 95, nobody cares.
I want to go back to something that I noticed when I was doing my research on the website that I thought was really interesting. You guys come from a science background, and I do know you personally. And so I know some of your ethos. You state unequivocally on the site that you are sustainable. You are not organic, and you talk about that. I'd like to discuss some of your approach to sustainability and what you think your responsibility is, and really, in saying that, the tacit judgment of what are the responsibilities for fine wine or, luxury or premium producers. So let's start with the science. Why no organic?
Well, this might be a polarizing thing for some of your viewers. We'll see. Organic is, at its simplest level, organic does not mean chemical free, first of all. And I think that that's what a large part of the consumer market believes. So if you buy an organic wine, it's been sprayed, unless you are living in a very, very fortunate place in the world. You'd have to be, there's some certain parts of Chile and things like that where they've just got, so low humidity and such, perfect conditions that disease pressure is nil to non-existent. But you're going to be probably putting lots of sulfur on, and you're going to be putting, and probably copper. And if you're organic, you're going to be using copper sprays. Now, copper is organic and it is allowed, but copper is also a heavy metal. And that can toxify your soil. It can get into the wines. It can, that can even get your wine banned going into Germany, who is, very diligent about testing about, actually running chemical analysis on wines that get imported there in a random way. So, organic is not what everybody organic thinks. So if we kind of sort of peel back from the idea there's an idea and an ethos behind organic that is very attractive and appealing. But when you look at sort of, if we're just very hard-nosed about the science of it, sustainability actually really suits that almost in a way that's even better, because if you're sustainable and you're willing to accept that there are some things that science and industry has innovated that are in fact better and safer to use for the environment than their or quote organic counterpart, then you are making a choice based on facts that suggests that this is something that is going to be more sustainable and better for the environment. And so, a healthy, happy, grape environment makes for healthy, happy waterways and local, wildlife and makes for happy
financial sustainability, which I think is part of the sustainability discussion that we tend to gloss over.
Well, but sure. Yeah. If you want to take, you're also taking some huge risks financially, right? If you're trying to just sort of say, well, look, we'll just let the grapes do and let Mother Nature do what it does. And if it is, you might run the risk of significant disease pressure, crop loss, quality loss. I think for me, that would be that would be the bigger concern. I can handle some crop loss. I can handle losing and having small vintages. I can't handle, and the brand can't survive handling low quality.
I know that a lot of this probably comes from a science background, but as wineries, and especially as, your single vineyard, small production winery, you are very much at the mercy of what's happening with climate change. How much have you seen that impact Destiny Bay over, say the past 5 to 10 years?
Okay. So sadly, at the moment, it's working in our favor. But that, overall, that's not a good thing.
With the warming of the old world?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is, so yes, we have seen, if I go back, we are now harvesting a full month earlier. The entire vintage season has now and it started to really emerge we saw the trend emerge in 2016, which was a smaller production year for us, a wetter vintage. And then we had and then in 2017, it was so wet that we lost everything. Well, we actually had some stuff, but it was not of a quality that met our standards. So we literally cut and dropped off every single grape on the ground. So that was a total loss. Now, that wasn't a loss because it was cold, and it was because it was wet. And the reason it was wet is because it was hot. And that's why it was so wet. And that's, and so that's what's happening, and I won't go into what I have learned as an amateur meteorologist, but there's a lot when you start to look at weather systems in the South Pacific and Fiji and Australia and New Zealand that tell you a lot about how these climate models emerge. One of the things that they basically forecast was that NIWA here in New Zealand, which is, the responsible sort of the scientific weather data, amongst other things, it issued a lot of these forecasts for the wine industry, and they forecast these, a period of wetter, increasing wet seasons in the North Island, and then as it got worse, they were forecasting out to sort of 2030 that it would then be much more drier and much more droughts as that wet weather would be falling further and further east of New Zealand. Now, what we're seeing happen right now, and the trend appears to be, is that appears to be happening about 5 to 7 years earlier than what even the NIWA forecasts are. At least if we use the last 4 to 5 years as a measure for it. So what we're finding now is, we had so 17 was wet, caused loss. 18 was also very warm, but again, a difficult vintage. But 19, 20, 21, and 22, 4 years in a row, budburst has been increasingly earlier each year, which then brings the whole vintage window backwards. And what we're also finding is that a lot of the weather that was hitting us in the North Island is now missing us, many times often skirting further off to the east. And so we're actually seeing drought conditions. So we ended up we never harvested until 2014 was the earliest Cabernet harvest we had ever had. I think we harvested on like the 4th, we were done on like the 4th, 5th, or 6th of April. Um, this past year, we were done harvesting all of our Cabernet on the 17th of March. Now that's
Holy shit.
and this is not a question of it being unripe. I mean, I was nervous bringing it in then. I was actually trying to figure out, I was actually like, boy, I hope it gets cloudy. I hope maybe just a little bit of rain, something to kind of just slow things down, because we often talk about hang time, right? And hang time's a big thing, especially with Cabernet, right? And ripeness. And so there was this fear, because we're now sort of dealing with an environment that we've never seen before here. So everything I knew about the way our vineyard behaves and responds and how do we grow and get peak ripeness and all that stuff, I'm having to take that whole book and throw it out the window now. And really rethink how we're looking at the viticultural side of thing, and then obviously also that's having impacts on the winemaking side. So yeah, I mean we had earliest bud burst ever in the 2022 season, which started in 2021. Earliest, we had a compression where we had our normally there'd be about 2 to 3 weeks between, say, the first varietal and the last varietal, say between, Malbec and Cabernet. I mean, the entire vintage harvest window this year was about 10 days apart. So it was, so it's very interesting. We're having to take a real hard look at what we're doing in the vineyard and how we manage the vineyard to do this stuff, because we had sort of geared the vineyard also in a lot of ways to support previous conditions in terms of, kilometers of subterranean drainage, and when do we, lots of other sort of, viticultural minutia. And so we're having to take a look at that, but it's not for lack of ripeness. I mean, the wines are fantastically ripe. I mean,
You got the harvest in. You are just getting started on the Place.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What's the next year look like for Destiny Bay?
Well, we've got I've just been writing all my tasting notes this last week on the 2020 wines. And those.
Can I interrupt to say, you have awesome tasting notes. I was looking at them on the site, where you've got the tasting notes and then you've got the month by month breakdown of the
vintage summary. Yeah, the season summary. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that, because I look at text sheets so often and I'm like, what is it? And I was looking at yours and I was like, oh, these are quite nice, because they're very personal. They're kind of story driven. And then you have this breakdown that's like, right, if you are geeky enough that you're going to read it, I'm going to give you the full geek experience. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, we're sometimes honest to a fault with that stuff. The traditional thing is you talk to a winemaker, and every year is the most amazing year in vintage ever. And if you read those vintage summaries, you will get the story and the tale of the terror and fear with which we had to survive a given vintage.
That's good storytelling.
Yeah, well, it is. I did get a degree in theater, so there's at least I do get to use those acting skills and the storytelling, my penchant for storytelling at a certain point. Those things are. I actually had. I don't know if they still do it, but I know that Lisa Perotti Brown was using my tasting notes or my vintage summary notes for some of their vintage reports back in the day, and they found it quite handy, because we do get pretty specific and detailed on those vintage summaries. So thank you. It's nice to know that somebody is reading them, enjoys them. I actually put a lot of time into them. I just finished and I'm waiting for the team to review my draft of the 2020 notes. And see if they approve of what I'm going to say, because this vintage is looking quite different. This kind of comes back to this climate change and stuff like that. Like, the wines are different now. These wines they're still Destiny Bay wines, but there is some qualities and characters that even I'm tasting in these wines that are, quite different than prior vintages. And so I'm very, curious and interested to see. I think I think for our devout Destiny Bay followers, I think some of them, I don't know, I'll see how they like them. Maybe some of them may not like these wines as much as they have in previous ones. I think these wines are going to take a little more time in the cellar to evolve, because they're just, they're becoming they're showing a level of tannin structure and profile that is something that is now starting to emerge with, I think, largely climate change that we haven't seen before. So it's how do we adapt the wines, and we can't just keep making the wines in the exact same style and the exact same way if we're seeing such drastically different vintage conditions. So, but I think the wines are looking really. I also think these wines are going to be. I think some people are going to be really, really blown away by these 20s as well. So,
thank you, Sean. I appreciate you giving me an hour of your time. I wish that you weren't so far away.
I know. Well, hopefully I'll find a way to make it to Spain. That is definitely, if I make it to Europe, that is definitely on the list, is to come see you and Keith. So,
100%. Thank you. And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening, and a great big thank you to my friend Sean Spratt for joining me today. The Italian Wine Podcast is among the leading wine podcasts in the world, and the only one with daily episodes. Tune in each day and discover all our different shows. Be sure to join us next Sunday for another look at the world of wine marketing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Vinitaly Academy, home of the gold standard of Italian wine education. Do you want to be the next ambassador? Apply online at vinitalyinternational.com for courses in London, Austria, and Hong Kong, the 27th to the 29th of July. Remember to subscribe and like Italian Wine Podcast, and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find our entire back catalog of episodes at ItalianWinePodcast.com.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston, and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love, and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.